We appreciate those gifts today. Well, we know that movie is really thought-provoking, and hopefully it raised a lot of questions and thoughts and comments in your mind. We hope that this portion of the afternoon will be equally thought-provoking. We have a really diverse panel of different members of the educational community, and I'm going to introduce them in just a moment. You should have received an index card, and so that was intended for you to write any questions or comments that you might have that you would prefer us to direct to the panel. You're also welcome to, vocally yourself stand up and address the questions to the panel in a moment as well. And so if anyone would like to pass their cards to these lovely ladies, that would be great. We'll collect those as I introduce the panelists. Just to kind of frame this discussion, this is meant to be a dialogue, not a debate, and we're all interested in just sort of sharing our distinct perspectives and vantage points on the issues. We'll begin with some introductions and allow each of our panelists to kind of, give a 3 to 5 minute sort of reaction to the movie and any sort of themes or issues that will really predominate. And then we'll allow time for you to ask questions and for the panelists to respond and dialogue about them. We'll ask that you keep your questions short and concise and to the point so that we can put in as many voices as we can into this 1 hour. Great, okay. So without further ado, our illustrious panel. We first here have Dr. Terry Mason. He teaches undergraduate, master's, and doctoral courses in curriculum, social studies, and teacher education. His research interests include education for democratic citizenship, global and international education, and teacher education programs and methods. In his role as director of the Center for Social Studies and International Education, he coordinates several international partnership projects. Beside him, we have Dr. Jesse Goodman. He's currently the chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. His primary scholarly interests include curriculum and cultural studies, Western intellectual history, teacher education, democracy in education, and school reform. His teaching responsibilities include working in the doctoral curriculum studies department and in a master's level pre-service teacher education program. Beside him is Mr. Terry Doherty. He's been in education for 38 years, and he's currently the Monroe County Community School Corporation Coordinator for Instructional Technology. We also have beside him Ms. Karen White. She graduated from St. Joseph's College in 2001 with a BA in elementary education, then started her teaching career as a first-grade teacher at an urban parochial school in Indianapolis. Then she left there to join the founding faculty at SENSE Sense Charter School in 2004. At Sense, she taught 2nd and 3rd grade as well as a Title I instructor. In May of 2009, she received her master's in educational leadership and earned her Indiana administrator's license, and is currently the assistant principal. Thanks for being here. Beside her is Ms. Kathy Jersey. Beginning her career teaching 1st grade, she has filled a wide array of educational leadership roles, including elementary school principal, director of literacy for MCCSC, teaching courses at Indiana University, and founding the Project School, a charter school serving students in the Indianapolis areas. And then at the very end, we have Dr. Jerome Harsey. Dr. Harsey's areas of expertise are socio-psycholinguistics, social semiotics, reading comprehension, reading teacher education, early literacy, and more recently, critical literacy. He's authored children's books, professional books, and videotape series related to literacy and other topics. And in 1990, Dr. Harsey and Dr. Christine Leland, together with a group of teachers from Indianapolis, created a new multi-age public K-8 inner city school featuring an inquiry-based critical literacy and multiple ways of knowing curriculum. Currently, the Center for Inquiry serves as a professional development site for IUPUI's teacher education program. So thank you all so much for being here. You can just each so a very large watch here to keep you all on task, Dr. Goodman especially. And we're hoping to have you.
I resemble that.
So we're hoping to have you just spend 3 to 5 minutes, and you're welcome to fill in any gaps in your bios that I may have left out inadvertently. And then just also with some quick preliminary reactions to the movie. Can you begin?
Sure, thank you.
Great.
I don't want to take up too much time because I want to get to the questions. I think that'll be the most interesting part of this. But I want to make a couple of quick observations about the film. The first one has to do with the medium itself. It is a film. And I think that represents both the power of it and perhaps some of the shortcomings of it as well. It's clearly a compelling and dramatic portrayal of a serious social problem related to education. And the film captures our imagination and our emotions in particular. And I'm reminded of a few years ago I wrote an article for Social Education, and I interviewed a prominent filmmaker. And he had been making films about history and historical subject matter. And I noticed in some of the films that he was playing with kind of the truth of some of the historical events in some interesting ways. And I confronted him with that. And he became very irritated, actually, very upset. He said, "It's entertainment, it's entertainment, it's entertainment." And he kind of pounded the table. And it made me think that, you know, there is a different kind of motive, in a sense, for film than other media that we're familiar with. And that's not to dismiss the content of this particular film. Clearly, as I said, there's clearly an important set of issues there, but we need to remember that, to an extent, film has a different capacity for the way we interact with it and how it affects us. But, and nonetheless, we need to think about other media that have brought this same message to us for a long time. Jeffrey Kennedy in the film says at one point that the issues and the solutions to these problems, he's been aware of those since I was a child and before. And we know that in the educational literature for many, many years, a lot of these issues and themes have been addressed. I remember my own education in the late 60s, Jonathan Kozol wrote a book called Death at an Early Age, which dealt with the issue of educational opportunity and the lack of it in many urban areas. Later on in the 80s, Jeannie Oakes did important educational work on the pernicious effects of tracking. And then more recently, Deborah Meyer in New York City has created schools that have been successful in the ways that some of the successful schools in the film that we saw. So not only can we identify the problem, and it's been done for a long time, but we also have some important solutions. And just finally, I noticed one of the missing voices in this film for me, and that was the teachers. If you think about it and you look who was interviewed there were parents, children, administrators, school reformers. Teachers were missing. And I have to ask that question, why? And to me, there are a lot of reasons, and we can maybe speculate on some of those, but to me, teachers are largely not engaged politically. With the unions that were mentioned, the teachers' organizations notwithstanding, teachers are not prepared, and that's one of our shortcomings in teacher education, to take the kind of political action that's necessary. And I don't mean necessarily just joining the union, but at a grassroots level in communities to really have the impact and make changes that are significant in the schools where they will work. And I think that's something we need to take very seriously and might have an impact on some of the problems that we see and providing some of the solutions for those. So I was going to end with the idea that teaching is political work. And I think it is. It's not necessarily the kind of political work that we saw portrayed in the film related to the teachers' unions, but it nonetheless has to be an important part of what teachers learn to be able to do.
Okay. Well, I'll keep things real short. Since I saw this movie a number of weeks ago, and as I've thought more about it and reflected on it, I've kind of come to the conclusion that it was a great piece of propaganda. As Terry mentioned, it pulls on your heartstrings. And it reminds me, I was talking to Jerry Varsity yesterday, it kind of reminds me of a comment that Richard Rorty once made in one of his books where he wrote, anything can be made look good or bad by being described in a certain way. And there's a lot of problems with the information that he gave. I think it was unfortunate that instead of looking at, well, what makes charter schools or these particular charter schools work, in other words, instead of following kids through the school day, and actually kind of trying to identify, well, why are these schools successful if they are? And Diane Ravitch has called into question a lot of the data that has been reported, for example, by the KIPP Academy, and questions the veracity of that data that they've produced. But even assuming, they really missed an opportunity to try to identify what makes these schools supposedly good. And instead, really kind of took, from my perspective, a cheap shot at teachers and teacher unions and public schools. Unfortunately, Superman was a myth. And I think the movie tries to, well, I think it did a better job of portraying some very well-known problems, as Terry identified. And we've known these difficulties of urban education for a long time. But it tries to present that there's a silver bullet. And it's a really misleading idea, and has actually very little research to support it. So, or even anecdotal information. There's a lot of information that's not presented in this movie that should have been presented if you're really going to do a fair analysis of these types of schools, as well as some hidden advantages that these schools have that weren't expressed. For example, Canada has several billionaires on his board of directors, and he has gotten millions and millions of dollars to create these schools. And so if you try to, if you try to duplicate those schools, you're talking about something that's financially impossible. KIPP I'm not as familiar with, so I don't know about those schools and their financial backing. There's also some expenses that they don't have that public schools feel compelled to have, such as lots of extracurricular activities and things like that, as well as busing and things. So, I'll just leave it at that. I think, as I said, it's an interesting piece of propaganda. It does discuss a very serious problem. Unfortunately, and I wish it was not true, but unfortunately, it presents what appears to be an easy solution to some very long-standing and difficult problems. In that sense, the movie was quite disappointing. Did I make
That's
it?
amazing.
Well, I'm going to open with what I usually open with, and that is the fact that teaching, being a teacher for now only 37 years, only 37 years, it's an extremely honorable job to have. You're given the responsibility for people's children to help them grow, to help them be their mentors, and with that responsibility comes a lot of problems and a lot of work. But I'll tell you what, overall, you love the job or you hate it, I guess. And those who hate it hopefully get out. I'm a union member, so I'm part of the enemy, I guess, here. I belonged to the union the whole time I taught. I've been active within that union as far as being a building rep and those sort of things. My reaction to the movie, the first time I saw it, I was shocked at that first graph they show, where they show the cost of paying a teacher going up, but the results stayed the same. I thought schools were failing. Schools are failing, and yet over 40 years, it's stayed the same, maybe a couple points higher. So to me, that doesn't say schools are failing. And as I look at kids, over those years are about the same. They've got outside pressures, and they know different things. There is a bigger gap of what they know than I know in certain ways. I mean, if I have an iPhone problem, hand it to a kid, he'll fix it for me. So their knowledges are a little different now, and we don't test that. I was having a discussion with a person today who we were talking about this whole point of failing schools, and I said, the way No Child Left Behind works, there's like over 30 things you have to be able to do successfully as a school, or you're labeled failing. Which is one of those things is all you have to fail to be a failing school. If you had, I think one of our schools had 4 children that missed one day, and that made them a failing school. One more day, they just stayed they've been there that one day, they would have passed. So failing schools is a problem. But I also know I've worked with teachers also in Indianapolis and in the urban schools, and there's a lot of trouble there. There's no doubt. So my reaction overall, I wish I would have seen more about teachers. I wish I would have seen more about public schools. I saw some public schools, they blamed the whole neighborhood's failure on the public school. I wish I would have seen more about what makes successful schools and what was going on. I'm in a lot of schools every day, and I see a lot of people working awfully, awfully hard.
This happened to be the third time that I've seen this movie. And every time I see it, I'm reminded that being in education and being a teacher is not a simple, clear-cut, easy job. Everyone just works so hard. But the one thing that I appreciate about this movie is that it focuses on a handful of specific kids, because when it comes down to it, that's who we work for, each individual child. And you can argue back and forth, traditional, charter, private school, but there's not one educational model that is good for every student that comes through our schools. So it's important to remember that each child is different, and each parent should have the choice as to how their child is educated, because not one way is going to work for every student.
This is only my second time, and I didn't see the whole thing this time. But the thing that occurs to me is really I guess two things really struck me today. One of them, which struck me as well the last time, and that is that I feel like at both a federal and a state level, there's a fairly concerted effort in pop culture and in politics to work fairly hard at playing educators against each other, rather than being focused on what's most important, and that's the priority of schools and kids and families and teaching and learning. And I think that, I no more would I presume to tell Dr. Harsty what to write than I would to tell this filmmaker what to film. Some of my noticings are that they clearly selected some of the most ineffectual traditional public schools that they could find, and clearly selected some of the more outstanding charter schools that they could find. And so in comparisons like that, you have to wonder what the motivation is, I think. And you have to wonder what kind of critical perspective you're supposed to be led to believe and to see. And when we think about that, I think then it's up to us to decide which side are we on? Are we on the side of education or not? Because really that's what the question is for me. Not about public schools or private schools or charter schools. And just for clarification, charter schools are public schools. And if there's any confusion about that, we'd be happy to clear that up. Charter schools are not private schools. And we have the same expectations with No Child Left Behind, with attendance, with participation in ISTEP, with number of school days, with all of those kinds of criteria that are very confusing to people about who has to play the game of that part and who doesn't. The other thing that really strikes me on a personal level right now is that we at the Bloomington Project School, I almost forgot our name, at the Bloomington Project School, we had our lottery 2 weeks ago, the week before spring break. And I can say of all the days that we've had this year, and we've had some tough ones, as any school does when you're actually serving kids and families, it was, without question, I think, the most painful day for our staff. We had 258 applications for 48 open spots. We said no to 210 kids. And applications came for all different reasons. The only recruiting we did was with Head Start, with Monroe County United Ministries, with Bloomington Housing Authority, and with the RISE, which is a transitional housing unit for women and children who've been abused. So our recruiting is exclusively with families in poverty. And every no letter that we put in an envelope felt heartbreaking because there was some decision that a parent had made a choice that they wanted to apply. In our school, 42% of our children live in poverty. And for a Bloomington school, Bloomington schools range from 3% of children living in poverty in one school to, I think, the latest number is 78% for Fairview right now. And so, and the percentage, I think, for Monroe County schools, Terry, I think it's 28% right now as a district. Do you know?
Yes.
Okay. And so that we sit at about 42%. Active recruitment of families in poverty is how we create some balance. I think that the other thing that certainly wasn't highlighted in the movie at all was that there are issues in some charter schools in what's called creaming, and somehow being able to differentiate your lottery in a way that selects students who have an automatic propensity towards school success. We don't play that game. We never will. That's not our mission. It's not intended to serve. And we do our lottery in a way that that could simply not occur. But I think that, again, our mission with the 210 kids who aren't coming to our school is to help them to know how fortunate they are to be in a town where there are amazing places that kids get to go to school. Not one amazing place, but lots of amazing places where kids get to go to school. And to help them in knowing what other resources there might be in the community as those needs arise and they come to us asking for those kinds of things. But I hope the mission of everyone in this room is to be about education, not about the kinds of conflicts that are attempting to be created for all of us by pitting schools against schools and teachers against teachers.
Well, I feel sort of compromised, I guess, because of my own role in all of this. I think you have to look at the bigger picture, and it seems like, truth no longer exists. Ever since Bush took it office, truth doesn't exist. It's just what story is spin. But the story that seems to be being spun out here is that public schools cost immense amounts of money, that state governments can't afford it, so where the money's going is to qualify teachers, and there's really a movement, I think, to destroy public education. You get merit pay, you get voucher systems, you get a cry for charter schools, you get all of the stuff that they want. Do away with tenure. Teachers in tenure are getting too much money, so therefore a lot of the charter schools are hiring unqualified teachers, or teachers that aren't qualified. That's not the case with the charter schools that I work with, but
Can't be in Indiana, actually.
no. And Canada, the Canada guy is interesting. He had his average student to pupil population is 50. He has $1 million, and you know that he dismissed a whole class of 7th graders and said they threw them out of the school because their teeth wasn't up. We could all look pretty good if we could do crap like that. What I find, now I worked with a group of teachers up in Indianapolis to start a public school. And it's not a charter school. It never has sort of been labeled a charter school. It was a select school. But it emphasized inquiry-based learning, multiple ways of knowing, and critical literacy was sort of the curriculum frame that we worked on. And we have been very successful in terms of passing the state test. And as a result of that, we were invited to start a second Center for Inquiry, and next fall we will open a high school. So, but it's based just, I think if they actually knew what we were doing from a curricular standpoint, they might focus down. You know what I mean?
I do.
It's just sort of on the surface level. And so that's why I feel very compromised, because I like the fact that we created an environment that's an exciting place to learn. But I also hate movies like this that sort of suggest that we have a corner on some sort of knowledge that nobody else has. I really would love to convince people that inquiry-based education, a strong emphasis on reading and writing children's literature, multiple ways of knowing curriculum, from a critical perspective, was the best damn curriculum you could have. Nobody'd be happier with that. When I actually looked at it, I think the thing that made all the achievement in our school is that the parents had assigned their kids up. If you get parents who are interested enough in their kids to decide what school to send them to, I think all of our achievement gains go right out the window, right there. I think it explains it.
And Jerry, that's actually what Screening is. It's not about manipulating the blind.
But I think
it's
that's
about being able to get kids whose parents are interested.
Well, sure it is, because if you recruit accordingly, that's exactly what
Well,
that
what
is.
would be a
It's
fairer way
manipulating
is if you had a charter school and you said anybody within a certain amount radius of that charter school will have an equal chance. And we're going to assign you whether you apply or not if you get picked. That would be a system that is much fairer than what it is now, where parents have to sign up to be picked.
Well, you see, that's what I find really problematic about this movie, is there's 5 kids being followed, but all of those parents are working parents. There's a difference between working poor and poor. There's a big difference between...
Yeah, and some of them said things like,
I mean,
I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to get my kid, these parents are...
McDonald's, but by God, my kid is going to go to private school. I mean, when I went to New York City to do a videotape, I was stunned. I mean, the cab drivers there would put all their energies into getting their kids not in public education. The only people that were in public education were people that had absolutely no other options available to them. And they were pretty dismal places. I said, when I watched it, the first time I watched this, I said, hey, I got the solution. Let's close all the damn private schools in the whole country. Make all those damn politicians send their kids to public school. Get some damn change and going on in.
Make them teach.
If everybody can bail their asses out, I mean, and I'm not, again, I'm even would say that about the professional. I mean, I can't tell you how many teachers I know in those settings who send their kids to private schools or to schools outside of the system. So that's why I feel very compromised. I don't think tenure is a problem, and it bothers me that there was even the suggestion that we should do away with due process. I mean, what kind of what the hell is that? If an administrator who's got 9 months to decide to fire you doesn't do their homework, they shouldn't get rid of you. I'm certainly not willing to do away.
Could you be a little more blunt?
I love good teachers. And I have a lot of faith. I think that's one of the nice things in this videotape is it says teachers are important, I think, and it also says that African American kids can learn. All kids can learn. Back in the 70s, we had all these movies that sort of demonized African American kids. Now we're demonizing teachers. But I think that's, I think you have to have faith in education. What bothers me also in here is they never talk about curriculum. Right. Curriculum is assumed to be the standardized test. That just really upsets me to no end. They don't talk about how you adapt curriculum to the needs of kids.
They don't say anything about the schools.
I know. So other than that, I don't have a single idea.
Well, great. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And so this is the portion where I have some questions written down that will kind of intersperse. Maybe we can begin with someone that wants to start out. You can direct your question to a specific individual on the panel, or you can just open it up to members of the panel. And again, if we could keep questions pretty concise, and even our answers pretty concise, so that we can hear as many voices, that would be great. We have about half an hour more for this. Great. Okay.
My question is, I hear a lot of rhetoric and even in the tone of some of the things that you all said. And I always wonder, have you ever met a parent who says that they didn't care about their child? Because there's so much rhetoric around parents that don't care, and that's why schools are bad, or kids who are bad, or that it's the parent's fault somehow that this child is unable to be educated. And I have yet to meet a parent who said, I could care less about my kid. And most of us who are teachers don't have experiences where parents are saying, I don't care about my child. But that seems to be the rhetoric around failing schools and all this other stuff. And so I'd like to hear your real opinion about this parent piece, because I heard some sentiments of that thought process in some of the things that you all said.
It's not that they don't care. It's that lots of high poverty, parents who live in high poverty areas weren't successful in school themselves. They're often very intimidated by schools. Ellen Bratman did a really nice study of the Bloomington schools, for example, and noted that parents in poverty were much less likely to advocate for their child in the public school. And when they did advocate, they weren't listened to as much as parents of wealth. And so it's not so much that, and of course there are always some parents who are drug addicts, as one of the kids had his father, and they might care about their kids, but they also might have other things on their mind. But those are very far and few between. But it's not really so much about parents caring, it's whether parents are willing to advocate and how strongly they're willing to advocate and how successful they are to advocate. And that's where you see a big gap between parents who want to enter their kids into a lottery versus parents who won't. And that's really the big issue, I think.
And I think that should be the language we use around it.
So it's not about
parents
caring.
who don't care.
Right. It's more about parents who are able and willing to advocate.
For me, that's often the excuse that we use. Yeah, so for me, that's the issue, is that it's, it really, teaching is brain surgery. And anyone who thinks it isn't hasn't taught a kid to read. And so I think that when we are struggling with the answer for how to get it done, is what we use.
But parents in poverty, they've got a big job on their hands.
All parents have a big job on
Yeah,
their
but,
hands.
but what I mean is, there's a lot of things going on to get things done. You just to get from point A to point B, you've got to work out childcare sometimes, you've got to work out transportation, and to get things done, there's a lot of work to do that. And sometimes it's tough to pick up all those pieces. It's a different kind of work that's going on for those folks. It just is.
All right, give them another voice.
Well, just to build off of that, though, it's building off of what was just being said there. It's not so much that the parents don't care. A couple of my friends teach at charter schools up in Indianapolis, and there was one parent in a parent-teacher conference who said, "Oh, I realize that we qualified for this year, but I'm okay with my son's lower grades because we're just testing this out this year." And so you do see sometimes where parents are having things like that, but the issue with the film, as we were just talking about now, is that it's basically generalizing too much the overall tone, as you were saying, Kathy, in terms of saying that parents don't care. That's the sort of excuse that we put on it. And there are issues with tenure and different things like that, and we can't label it outright as a failing idea. There are issues that I've seen in schools where a teacher will announce that they're going to retire in 4 years. In those last 4 years before they retire, the school district then ups their pay nearly 25 grand or 30 grand as bonuses, so that if they retire with that tenure at that higher pay for the rest of their time. And so there's issues. issues and little details and intricacies inside of them that need to be looked at more.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, do we have any questions? Some new topics. There's so many things we could talk about. Great.
Yeah, the movie talked a lot about how quality teachers make quality students, and quality schools, and quality all of that. Right now, we have something like No Child Left Behind that does that, but obviously there's a lot of rhetoric about the fact that it really doesn't do that, doesn't do its job. They talk about the 23-step plan that they had in D.C. What experiences have you guys had with evaluating quality teachers, and what sort of issues have come up in that?
Well, the only generalization I can make about really outstanding teachers, I'm not just talking about okay teachers, is that they're all unique. You know, they all find a way of expressing some of themselves and their creativity through their teaching, and trying to, you know, as I said last time, there's a lot more to good education than just good teachers. You need good teachers. There's more to it than just that. And one of the unfortunate things about this film is it didn't try to identify anything about the schools that made them successful. Like, for example, a sense of community that many charter schools have, that a lot of public schools have a hard time creating. But you know, another thing I've noticed about good teachers is that it's very easy to make some kind of laundry list and say good teachers can do this, come up with 20 or 30 things. In fact, I think it was 1910 or 1912, Charters wrote a book on a study of what makes somebody a good teacher, and came up with 1,001 behaviors, attitudes, dispositions, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, to me, good teaching, as I mentioned last time I was here, is like pornography. You know, I can't really describe what it is, but I know when I see it. And you can tell when somebody's a good teacher, there's something almost magical about it. And I'm talking about outstanding teachers, as opposed to, now there's also clearly, like in any occupation, there's clearly incompetent people. You know, there's incompetent lawyers, doctors, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe sometimes the process for fair hearings can become maybe too cumbersome in some districts, especially maybe large urban districts. But I would say that this idea that somehow teachers are uniquely unqualified, and the irony is that in the last 20 years, it's been conservatives who have really been pushing what's going on in schools, and so we can try to control more what teachers do in public schools, and of course that inhibits creativity, and so we create charter schools or other kinds of opportunities where teachers might have to feel a little more freedom and a little more respect, and no wonder they maybe do a little better.
One thing I'd say is, my first 5 years, they shouldn't have paid me to teach. You know, it was terrible. It really was awful. I saw things and I didn't know how to react to them. And I thought it was kind of nice that Mr. Canada said that, you know, it took 5 years for him to become a master teacher. I thought, dang, he did it pretty early. But, you know, they expect teachers to be great right out of the box. You've got 3 years to prove yourself. And believe me, you're not great right out of the box. I've had 30 student teachers, and probably 3 of them, you know, were pretty good. As you know, as far as just could handle the class right then as soon as they walk in my door. But most can't. It takes a while. So that's the other piece. You know, getting that time to get better.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think you want, you know, I think it's a pretty weak mind that can only think about quality teaching and whether or not you did well on the test scores. So, I mean, I think you got to be pretty lack a lot of imagination. I guess what I want is a teacher that can build curriculum from the interest of kids, can adapt lessons so that a kid who's not doing well can feel good about himself. I mean, to apply, I think the best to keep an edge on learning and don't make it so routinized that you put the poor little suckers to sleep. You know, that you keep your eye on learning and not on discipline. I mean, how many schools don't get so hung up on this? You think that's what schools are for, it's discipline. They don't need to sit in their seats to have who know how to use the arts to add interest to the curriculum.
God forbid we intellectually engage.
I even am a little worried about social studies these days. I mean, given our globalization of the world and all the emphasis on math and science and reading, I get nervous about other areas like the arts and social studies. I think there is important elements of curriculum. I think you need to know the standards. I think you should read through them and then throw them away. That's sort of a sense of what the hell you're doing. That's one of the advantages of working with an older teacher or a more seasoned teacher, is that they do get a sense of what's being tested and that kind of what things are really being looked at, and so they don't use it as a blueprint, but they use when the time occurs in the classroom, they get the opportunity to teach that. So, but I think, I would certainly say one of my criteria for a poor teacher would be teaching to the best.
I have 4 children who range from 9 to 17. And I know I look way too young for that, 17, but yeah.
I don't think so.
Because he's known me since I was 21. But the thing for me is I want to, in every classroom I want to spend time in, I want to wish that teacher were my kid's teacher. And not just my youngest, who's really struggled with literacy, or my oldest, who was birthed speaking full sentences or whatever. I want to be able to feel like, yeah, it'd be good for my kid.
My criteria is I think for coffee. If I meet a teacher that after the interview I don't even want to have coffee with.
Great. Well, a related question that came in
Or scotch.
It's about specific tools and techniques that schools of education, such as IU, should use to prepare its graduates to be effective teaching in difficult circumstances. And so I think all of us can maybe answer some of those questions related to just have a good question about what makes a quality teacher. So what is the role of teacher education programs in fostering those skills?
One of the things I've thought about lately that we could do here, a better job of here, is to, when we send students out to do field work, internships, and field experiences in student teaching, if we did a lot more with them to come to know and interact with the communities where they are, not just the school building, but the community, who's there, who is a part of that community, where do the students come from, what are the demographics of it in a way, so that students will go, our students going out to be teachers, will not only be dealing with the academic curriculum and teaching methods, but also coming to understand something about the community context, because they're all different. We send our students out to Edgewood Primary School in a rural area, right? And I think it's important to know something about the families that come from those rural areas to effectively teach their students. It kind of goes back to the question about what constitutes a good teacher. To me, focusing on the building capacity of teachers to understand and really interact with communities is a really important element, and I frankly don't think we do enough of that.
For me, I think the best thing we can do is emphasize the word education, teacher education. That teacher education is should also ideally intellectually engage pre-service teachers. And if our students, pre-service teachers, learn to be curious about the world in which they live, curious about children, curious about what children would benefit from exploring, and not so fearful about things like teaching to the test. I think we would be doing them a service. We should kind of look at teacher education as an opportunity before you get handle all those responsibilities of being a teacher, a chance to think about what it means for me as an individual to be the best teacher I can possibly be. What can I bring to the occupation? What can I exploit of myself that will make me be the best teacher I can be? But to me, again, the key is can we help pre-service teachers learn to be intellectually engaged themselves, and then how can we help them intellectually engage the children that they'll eventually teach?
But we got to go beyond that. If you have a really engaging lesson, that's all you need, because that's not true. There are other small things you've got to know, within working with those students in the classroom. Survival techniques.
Something that wasn't touched on a lot when I was a pre-service teacher that I'm just starting to learn about this year is brain-based research and how children learn, and not just children as a blanket statement, but in my school, close to 90% of our students are on free or reduced lunch, so I'm really trying to learn how students that come from poverty are learning, and our kids are stressed out. There's so many factors at home and in our, in their environments that are stressing them out, and the stress is affecting how they learn. And so I think that would be an important area, as you go out and begin your teaching career, to keep in mind and to look into.
I have a question for a couple of the IU professors. You two, right there? You three? Yes. Okay. I was a teacher for 3 years, taught second grade, and after 3 years realized that it was not for me. And I just want to know if you guys have a process for helping people figure out at 18, 19, 20 years old if they're really going to be one of those quality teachers, because I thought that since I loved kids, that meant I can teach, I can do this. So I wonder if there's any conversation about who really should be teachers, and can you learn to become a great teacher, or is that part of who you are as a person? I don't really know.
You want to take this? Yeah, this is, I think, a couple things that you hit on.
You missed the session with the crystal ball.
Oh, right.
You mentioned that you went into teaching because you love kids, and you thought that was going to be sufficient for you to become a good teacher. And of course it is. It's one of those things that is necessary, but not necessarily sufficient to be a good teacher. I often tell students that most of us like food, but we don't all become chefs. So the idea with the analogy to teaching is that most of us love children, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to pursue that as a career in teaching. But I think that, again, I think there are things that we could do. One of the things people talk about now in teaching as a characteristic is something called resilience. And that can be defined in a lot of different ways, but I think if we began talking about what it means to be resilient in a difficult environment, and classrooms are challenging environments, that we could begin to help candidates for teaching begin to see if they have those characteristics, and then perhaps to build them over the course of the time that they're with us. We try to do that, but it's difficult. I think there's only so much we can do to prepare teachers for the kinds of things that they're going to encounter. And doctors and lawyers sometimes have the same issues, that they go into that profession thinking that's what they want to do, and then they decide to do something else. So become teachers.
Yeah.
That's it. So the idea of changing careers is something that's inherent, and it's probably okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't see it as a failure in that sense, And the other thing I think it brings up is that teaching is a very complex occupation. It's not like, my son works at, what's that clothing store, Old Navy, I guess, and he was able to learn how to do everything that they needed to do in about 2 weeks. And, and he's been working there a year, and he's quite bored because, there's not that much challenge to it. But teaching has a lot of challenges to it, and it isn't for everybody. But it's almost impossible for us to be able to identify, except that I have this helmet in my office. If I had put that on your head, I could have told you that you should come teaching.
Great, thank you for that.
Can I add one thing to that, though? One of the most important pieces, I think, to the university level for you is the student teaching. That's the cumulative event where you go into the classroom and you work. And I've always had a problem with the fact that who do they let do that, as far as being the supervising teacher? Just about whoever the principal wants to let do that. And many times they're trying to solve a problem in a classroom by putting a student teacher with somebody who shouldn't have a student teacher. And so I've always felt like there should be a level where we qualify who gets to be that mentor. And I'm still waiting for that, because to me that's really good.
I guess we should do this side of it. Back to you.
Hi, my name is Christine Anderson. I'm a senior studying economics and business law. One of you said, and it was a great point, that there weren't any teachers featured in the video, and that that was something that needed to be changed so that they can kind of act as a catalyst for change as well. One thing I did notice is that almost everyone profiled was a teacher at one point, and that's Reed. Both people who started KIP and everything, and the one person who wasn't was actually Randy Weingarten, who has a background in law instead. But that being said, amongst all those people, Reed has started her new nonprofit called Students First, and the one big thing that they're focusing on is getting rid of LIFO, the last in, first out practice. And I was kind of wondering what your background on that. And just as a quick anecdote, my sister just graduated from the School of Education here 3 years ago, was the highest performing teacher in her district for the past 2 years in terms of getting his math scores up and everything. But she just got a letter 3 weeks ago from her principal saying that she would be fired the next year because of LIFO, basically. So I was kind of curious.
Because of what?
LIFO, the last in, first out policy.
No.
So I was curious what your perspectives were on that.
You know, one of the problems with teacher unions is that they model themselves after industrial unions. And, you know, it's not very easy to say, we have to put workers before we have to put widgets. With teaching, it becomes a little more complex because we're not dealing with widgets, although some people want to turn them into people who just produce widgets with test scores. But we're not dealing with a product, we're dealing with another human being. And there are some very natural, you know, like there are naturally born artists and naturally born actors. There are some naturally born teachers that don't need many years to be outstanding. They just have whatever, you know, it takes. You know, they wouldn't even have to go to maybe college even, and they'd be great teachers. And most contracts, again, because they're modeled after industrial union, is this, you know, first in, first out kind. Last in, first out rule. And that's the same thing as, again, in the movie. One of the great advantages that charter schools have is they can select their faculty. You know, a lot of principals, especially in urban areas, can't even select their faculty, right? Because every year the union decides, well, who's left, and they get their choice, and that's all part of the contract. So, you know, I mean, unions are not the bad guy here, but it's part of a very complex problem. And you've identified one of the unfortunate consequences, I think, of the union administration, most contracts, but there's problems with the other. If we had done the other way, you know, principals just make those without due process. So yeah, you know, it's a difficult issue. I don't really have an answer.
Well, I was roofed my first 5 years of teaching. Well, actually, it wasn't my first 5. The first 2 I wasn't. In my second year, I got roofed. And I continued. I almost went to Australia too, because that was the only job open, I think, at the time. But, you know, for 4 or 5 years, every year, I get the pink slip, you know, and I'd wait to see if I had a job, or I'd start looking for someplace else for a job. But on the other hand, in that environment that we have, we would all like to say, well, my principal loves me, I'm doing a good job, and they'll hire me back if I didn't have seniority, let's say. It's hard to say if that would happen, because the way I see decisions get made sometimes, they're made in other strange ways. I mean, we have our share of problems in the school corporation with personnel where it's just crazy decisions. You know, as a teacher, I'm glad that I can buy a house and count on the fact that I'm going to have a payment next year. You know, and I can keep that house. I can count on that job next year.
You're not subject to win.
Yeah, I'm not subject to win. But on the other hand, you know, we do need to move bad teachers out. And as a union member, I've helped move teachers out. I've been there, and there's a process that you follow. You put them on an improvement plan, and they either want to improve and try those steps and don't make it, or they say this isn't worth it. That's the other thing. They said that they have a number. Most teachers don't get fired. They're told, hey, things are coming to a point here where you're not going to get renewed, so they resign or they retire. So it makes the numbers look bad, but hardly anybody chooses, oh no, go ahead, I'm going to go through this whole thing, let's fire me. Especially in the community I live in. Let's do it that way.
This is a similar question, but I guess kind of the funny guy at the end there.
You mean that? The funny looking guy.
But there seems to be pretty much agreement that most teachers that become really good teachers, not all, but most, suck in their first few years. And so how can you support a system of tenure that grants them at least a pretty great degree of job security before you can even find out whether you're a good enough teacher, whether you can be a great teacher?
I know I'm not funny, but I really want to answer.
Okay.
So,
how did you have it?
Thank you. So, two things. One is they don't all suck at the beginning. Yeah. Terry, has confessed that he did, and now he feels better. But they probably didn't nearly as much as he thinks. We found ourselves in a situation at the project school where the work is really hard work, and it's hard to teach anywhere. There's no question about it. When you're in the process of creation constantly from the start, it adds that layer to it, and we have certainly upped the expectations for ourselves in many ways, as many schools do. But we developed a position called an intern. And so we had identified some early teachers who we felt like showed tremendous promise. And so we placed them in internships for a year. And they make somewhere between an instructional assistant and a beginning teacher. And in that position, they have much greater responsibility than they would as an instructional assistant. And they also have much greater opportunity, and it really is their opportunity to shine, and for us to know if they're ready, and for them to know if they're ready. And what they gain in that year is pretty extraordinary. And then we decide from there. But the other thing is I think that while Indiana dances around what they're going to do with mentorships and plays with it in all different ways, and some of us have been mentors, and it's, that mentor role is every bit as key as that student teaching role. I think that one of our huge issues and challenges in teacher education is a 10 to 16-week student teaching. It's ludicrous. I would never let somebody operate on me who spent 16 weeks, playing it out in the operating room with the first 3 watching. So, I think it's really problematic, and I think that we need to look at a longer-term relationship for student teachers. One of our most successful student teachers this year was a student teacher who last semester did field time in the same classroom she was student teaching with, 3 mornings a week, very intense, and then moved into her student teaching this fall semester and did almost a whole semester with that additional time on her own, and has had tremendous success and most certainly will not suck in her first year. So I think that there have to be some really smart mentoring opportunities, interning opportunities, opportunities for kind of beyond that traditional experience. And I will say, related to loving kids, first of all, I don't even think that most people love kids, to tell you the truth. I think we love our own kids, but I think a lot of people, would say happily, no, I don't. But in the very first session I teach in some of my courses, I say, don't ever say that in an interview, because that's an assumption. If you say, I don't have to ask that question. So what is it about teaching that was for you? What about education was for you? Like Jesse said, that focus on education is really the piece. So, and I recommend real estate and recreation. I think they're both really good if you like kids.
I want to just answer the question too.
Which was really to him.
We at the Center for Inquiry in Indianapolis, what we did is we started a teacher ed program right at the center. So we got 30 undergraduates from IUDUI, took them right there. And another professor and I, plus 3 graduate students, really worked with them for their whole professional career. So that, and all of the methods courses were, they would go into the classroom and then we'd come back out. So we were always had access to, and of course, the center had a particular kind of philosophy. So those students really picked up on that philosophy and were able to implement it. It was very effective, but it was also very costly. I mean, both Chris Leland and myself ended up teaching way over the normal course load. What we also found out is that the first 3 years after, despite the fact that they had worked in an inner city classroom for their whole preparation, and they looked good in their own, when they took over from our teachers, when they got their own classrooms, they still had problems. And so we found that we were really mentoring them 3 years later. Now, the problem is that nobody wants to spend the kind of money. We know how to do teacher education, I think. I don't think anybody wants to spend the kind of money that it takes to really prepare teachers. I think that program actually won an award from the International Reading Association as being one of the top 8 programs in the United States. But it also was very costly in terms of faculty. Even at IUDUI, a lot of the faculty didn't want to participate in that program because it took so much time for them off campus. Some students found it hard to participate in that program because they were constantly in schools for the whole time. But it was a very effective program, and I think we know how to prepare teachers. But I don't know that you're not going to still suck when you get on. I found some kids that I thought were just wonderful teachers at our center, and when they went and had their own classroom, they had their problem. I don't know that I'd say they suck. It's just, there's a lot to orchestrate when it's all on your own, and you're not working off the residual structure of another teacher.
And there's something that a lot of people don't understand, and that is teacher education programs cannot educate people to be, exceptional teachers. We might be able to make them be exceptional novice teachers, but they're mostly still novice. And, we don't expect lawyers, for example, in their first year out of law school to start talking in front of the Supreme Court. In fact, they often don't even get into a court. And same thing with medical students. They graduate from medical school. They don't go right into operating rooms. So one of the problems is that people, this is why we like every politician as a standard for them, is for them to teach for 3 months before they vote on any of the education legislation. People think that because they've sat in classrooms, they know what teachers do. It doesn't seem that difficult. They collect lunch money and they help kids walk down the hallway to the bathroom, and so their image or their understanding of the complexities involved in the work is really faulty. And people think, after teacher education program, a couple of years, they should be able to teach great. And it's just, it's too complex for most people. Now, some people, as I said, they wouldn't even need those 2 years and they could go into a classroom and be great. But for most people, it does take more than just those couple of years to become great. And mostly they can just survive.
Okay, one final question. I'm sorry for the time constraint.
I remember that you were talking about the fact that you treat everybody like to a certain standard when really everybody thinks uniquely. And I was kind of wondering how you could address the problem, because I find that even kids, for example, who don't have learning disabilities or maybe ADHD can struggle with teachers who you'll give a valid interpretation of a question and they'll still mark you off for points because that wasn't the interpretation they saw, even though your interpretation was completely valid and would have made sense.
And even with ADHD, for example, their brain is wired differently. So I mean, you can't expect them to see the world exactly the way you do, because that will never happen. They have completely different brains. So how do you feel we can kind of confront this normal, which I don't even know who the normal person is that they gauge this standard off of, and foster more of the uniqueness?
It hasn't been the decade for that, that's for sure. You know, yeah, I mean, that's one of the, we're a very diverse society, you know, there are some comparisons to Finland, you know, which make no sense at all. By the way, they don't have any charter schools, and they have one of the strongest unions, teacher union systems in Europe. So that kind of undermines what the theme of the movie was. But they're also very much more homogenous in terms of their heritage and cultural background. You know, we have 300 million people in our society. I don't know, Finland, I think, has got 10 at the most. You know, just there's all kinds of problems. But you know, one of the failings in my career, I think, of me and my colleagues, no offense to my colleagues here, but is that we have not done a very good job of being able to articulate to the population at large the kinds of ideas that Kathy and Jerry and other people have kind of talked about on this panel about what makes for a good education. And instead, under the notion of the ironic idea of leaving no child left behind, we've standardized the curriculum that, as Deborah Meyer once wrote in one of her books, leaves many children behind. And really what it is leave no child untested so that we can, and it's not really about dropout, it's about how can we push kids out. I don't know what it is, maybe Jerry, you have this information, but I think IPS, you know, 70% of the freshmen don't graduate from IPS high schools. And that's not, but that's, when we have something like that, that's not dropping out, that's pushing kids out. And then going back to money, if they all stayed in, that would more than double the cost of high school education in IPS, which they don't have. So you know, beside all the, you know, underneath all the rhetoric, I have real questions about how serious people really are about not leaving kids behind when they come up with this idea of a normal child. And then, well, this clear school failing, like North and South High School in Bloomington did, because their special ed kids can't do second-year algebra or can't do geometry. So then the whole school gets said, well, you didn't need AYP. And if it doesn't happen again, you're going to be a failure.
And I did research on No Child Left Behind, and you're not even guaranteed that whatever you need to be able to just take the test is available to you in your community. They're all across the board as to what they'll be able to provide you.
And then I as a teacher get evaluated on how the student does, and according to the new legislators, new bills coming out, if I get fired, I'm now blacklisted and can't teach anywhere.
And that's based on a faulty assumption that I mean, teachers have lots of responsibilities, lots of them. But one responsibility they cannot have, it's from my perspective, impossible. You cannot be responsible for somebody else learning something. It's like you can't be responsible for forcing a horse to drink water. You can make the water sweet so that the horse wants to drink. You can keep the horse from drinking for a while so it gets enthused about drinking. You can make it a nice, you know, environment. Teachers have lots of responsibilities, but they can't, literally, they can't be responsible for somebody else learning. That has to be a decision that the learner makes. And ideally, a really good teacher is a person who's able to create that desire.
I think, though, that you're putting your question really addresses one of the real fundamental problems in this video or in this movie. And that is, I mean, you're talking about differentiating the curriculum. And you're talking about differentiating the curriculum. I would say, as a teacher, you got to trust the learning. These are not easy things to learn to do, but you got to trust the learning process that everybody can learn. And you've got to give people the opportunity, and you've got to listen to what they're saying and build from that particular thing. Those are not, I mean, it took me a long time to trust the learning process. I used to think, oh my God, they got under the table. I know they're not talking about that damn book. You know, I don't know what they're doing under there. But, you know, all of a sudden I was just videotaping, and the videotape showed that the little suckers were actually talking about the book. But, you know, when I first started teaching, I thought if I didn't see it, it didn't happen. But I mean, you do have to trust learners, and you got to trust the learning process, and that means you've got to be attentive, and you've got to be a kid partner, and then build curriculum from kids. And all of that takes college education, training.
We want to thank all of our panelists so much.
I want to thank all of our sponsors, our volunteers, our army of volunteers, and for you for coming out and spending some of your free day with us. Just a couple things. If you have some extra additional questions or comments, please email us at lcle@indiana.edu. Also, we expect to do many more of these events in the future, so please be on the lookout for these. And if you would like to get more involved in managing and running these things, please join our graduate student organization. Also, the Dean's Office notified us this morning that Michelle Rhee on her Twitter feed was following the IU School of Ed Twitter feed because of this event. And this is the second event. She's speaking in Indianapolis tonight, but she's very interested in what we're doing here. We are so privileged to have the School of Education in our community and as a part of our lives. Hopefully our discussion has kind of ignited a further passion in you to help make a change in our educational system, which doesn't necessarily include teaching. We are also parents, volunteers, administrators, etc. So thanks for sharing part of your Friday with us.